summer before my high school graduation should have been filled with anticipation and dreams of the future. Instead, it became a nightmare that still haunts my sleep 15 years later. I was 17 then, caught in that awkward space between childhood and adulthood, spending my nights alone while my mother worked the graveyard shift at the local hospital. Our small house had become my sanctuary during those long hours between 8 in the evening and 4 in the morning. Mom had taken the overnight job out of necessity after my father left us 3 years earlier. The pay was better, she said, and it meant she could be home during the day when I was at school. What she didn't say, but what I understood even then, was that she was sacrificing her sleep and her peace of mind to keep food on our table and a roof over our heads. Those solitary nights had created a rhythm for me. I would wave goodbye to Mom at 7:30, her nurse's uniform freshly pressed, her tired eyes trying to hide the worry that came with leaving her teenage son alone. She would remind me to lock the doors, to call if I needed anything, and to get to bed at a reasonable hour. I would promise all of these things, knowing that I would keep the first 2 promises but break the third one regularly. That particular night started like any other. I had settled into my usual routine of video games and mindless television, the familiar sounds of our old house creaking around me like a lullaby. The heating system would kick on with a gentle hum, the refrigerator would cycle through its mechanical song, and occasionally, a car would pass by our quiet street, its headlights briefly sweeping across our living room walls. By 11:30, my eyelids were growing heavy. I had school the next day, and despite my teenage tendency to stay up too late, I knew I needed sleep. I turned off the television and my gaming console, gathered up the empty soda cans and chip bags from my evening of junk food indulgence, and headed upstairs to my bedroom. My room was my personal sanctuary, decorated with posters of bands I thought were cool and sports teams I followed with the passionate dedication that only teenagers can muster. I changed into my pajamas and settled into bed with my phone, scrolling through social media and texting with friends who were probably supposed to be sleeping too. The blue glow of my phone screen was hypnotic in the darkness of my room. I found myself losing track of time as I mindlessly scrolled through posts and photos, my brain slowly shutting down as sleep began to claim me. I don't remember the exact moment I fell asleep, but I do remember the moment I woke up. The sound that pulled me from sleep was subtle at first, barely registering in my unconscious mind. It was the sound of our front door closing, the distinctive click of the latch and the slight squeak of the hinges that I had heard thousands of times before. My first thought, still clouded by sleep, was relief. Mom was home early from work, probably due to a slow night at the hospital. I glanced at the clock beside my bed, its red digital numbers glowing in the darkness. 3:30 in the morning. That was unusual. Mom's shift didn't end until 4, and even then, it usually took her another 30 minutes to finish her paperwork and drive home. But hospitals were unpredictable places, and sometimes the staff was sent home early when patient loads were light. I rolled over and pulled my blanket up to my chin, ready to drift back into sleep. That's when I heard the footsteps downstairs. At first, they sounded normal, the familiar pattern of my mother's movement through our house after a long night at work. But as I lay there in the darkness, something began to feel wrong. The footsteps weren't following Mom's usual routine. Normally, when she came home from work, she would go straight to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea, then head upstairs to check on me before getting ready for bed. These footsteps were different. They were slow, deliberate, and they seemed to be wandering aimlessly through our downstairs rooms. I listened more carefully, my sleepiness beginning to fade as a knot of unease formed in my stomach. The footsteps moved from the living room to the dining room, then to the kitchen, then back to the living room. They weren't the tired, purposeful steps of my exhausted mother. They were the careful, exploring steps of someone who wasn't familiar with our house. Minutes passed, and the strange walking continued. Whoever was downstairs wasn't settling in for the night or preparing for bed. They were moving through our house like they were taking a tour, pausing in each room as if they were examining everything inside. The realization hit me slowly, like a cold wave washing over my body. This wasn't my mother. My heart began to race as the terrible truth settled in my mind. Someone else was in our house. Someone who had somehow gotten inside while I was sleeping, someone who was now walking through our rooms in the middle of the night. I felt paralyzed by fear, my body frozen under my blankets as my mind tried to process what was happening. I forced myself to get out of bed, my legs shaking as I stood up. I had to know for sure. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was Mom after all, and she was just having trouble sleeping, or maybe she was looking for something she had misplaced before work. I clung to these desperate hopes as I carefully opened my bedroom door. The hallway was dark, just as it should be. I could see the faint outline of the staircase leading down to our first floor, and everything looked normal. But the footsteps were still there, still moving slowly through our downstairs rooms. I crept to the top of the stairs and knelt down, peering through the wooden railing into our living room below. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. Our living room was completely dark, just as I had left it when I went to bed. But someone was definitely down there, moving around in the darkness without turning on any lights. The footsteps continued their slow, methodical pattern, and I could occasionally see a shadow pass in front of the window where a streetlight cast a faint glow into the room. Whoever was in our house wasn't trying to steal our television or our computer. Those items were right there in the living room, expensive and easy to grab, but the intruders seemed completely uninterested in them. Instead, they continued their strange, purposeless wandering, as if they were waiting for something or someone. I knew I had to find out what was going on, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to hide. I couldn't just lie in my bed and wait for whatever was going to happen. If someone was planning to hurt my mother when she came home, I had to do something to protect her. Gathering all my courage, I stood up and turned on the light in my bedroom. The sudden brightness felt like a beacon in the darkness, and immediately, the footsteps downstairs stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the walking had been. Whoever was down there now knew that I was awake. I waited at the top of the stairs, listening for any sound, any indication of what the intruder was doing. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only a minute or two. Then, slowly, carefully, I made my way down the stairs. I called out into the darkness, my voice cracking with fear. "Mom? Are you home?" But there was no response, only the oppressive silence of our house in the middle of the night. I reached the bottom of the stairs and looked around our living room. Everything appeared to be exactly as I had left it. Nothing had been moved or disturbed. But then I saw the shoe print on the kitchen floor. It was clear and distinct on our tile flooring, the muddy outline of a boot that was definitely not my mother's. My heart hammered in my chest as I looked up from the floor, and that's when I saw him. A man was sitting at our dining room table, perfectly still and silent in the darkness. He wore all black clothing and a dark mask that covered his face, making him almost invisible in the shadows of our unlit house. He was staring directly at me, but he didn't move or speak. He just sat there, motionless, like he had been waiting for me to find him. The sight of him sitting calmly at our family table, in the place where my mother and I ate our meals and did homework and talked about our days, was so surreal and terrifying that for a moment I couldn't move. He looked like a nightmare that had somehow materialized in our safe, familiar home. We stared at each other across our kitchen, predator and prey frozen in a moment of mutual recognition. His eyes, visible through the holes in his mask, held no emotion that I could read. He wasn't angry or excited or afraid. He was just watching me with a cold, patient intensity that made my skin crawl. The spell broke when my survival instincts finally kicked in. I turned and ran, taking the stairs two at a time as I rushed back to my bedroom. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911, but somehow I managed to call for help. The emergency operator kept me on the line, asking questions and trying to keep me calm while police officers were dispatched to our house. I could hear the man moving around downstairs while I waited. His footsteps were slow and deliberate as he walked through our house, but he made no attempt to come upstairs after me. It was as if he knew I was there, knew I had called for help, but he wasn't concerned about me at all. He was waiting for something else, someone else. The realization of what he was waiting for hit me like a physical blow. He was waiting for my mother. He had somehow found out about her work schedule, knew that she would be coming home alone at 4 in the morning, and he was planning to be there when she arrived. The thought of my mother walking unsuspectingly into our house, where this masked stranger was waiting for her, filled me with a terror I had never experienced before. I heard a car pulling into our driveway and felt a moment of pure panic. Was it the police, or was it my mother coming home early? I ran to my bedroom window and looked down at our driveway, relief flooding through me when I saw the familiar white and blue of a police cruiser. The moment the police car arrived, I heard rapid footsteps downstairs and the sound of our front door opening. The intruder was leaving, but he made no attempt to run or hide. From my window, I watched as my mother pulled into the driveway just seconds after the police arrived. When the officers searched our house, they found no trace of the intruder except for those muddy footprints and the lingering feeling of violation that comes when a stranger has been in your most private spaces. They questioned me extensively, and I could tell from their expressions that they believed my story, even though the man had vanished without leaving any other evidence of his presence. The officers explained to my mother and me that this type of incident was more common than people realized. Home invaders who seemed more interested in the occupants than in stealing property, who would break into houses and wait, sometimes for hours, for their victims to return. The thought that this man had been studying our family, learning our routines, and planning whatever he had intended to do to my mother made us both feel sick. We never found out who the man was or what his intentions were. The police investigated for weeks, checking for similar incidents in our area and following up on every lead they could find, but the masked intruder seemed to have vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. My mother quit her night job the following week, taking a significant pay cut to work day shifts at a different hospital. We installed a security system and new locks, and for months afterward, we jumped at every unexpected sound in our house. The sense of safety and security that we had taken for granted was gone, replaced by the constant awareness that evil could intrude into our lives at any moment. But it was the image of that man sitting calmly at our kitchen table that haunted me the most. The patient way he had waited in our home, the emotionless stare from behind his mask, and the terrifying realization that if I hadn't woken up and called the police, my mother might have walked into a trap that could have cost her everything. Even now, all these years later, I still check every room when I come home at night. I still feel a chill when I think about how close we came to a tragedy that night, and how a stranger's twisted plans were thwarted only by my insomnia and a lucky coincidence of timing.